This is something I've postponed for a couple of years now, but I just feel like God has placed it on my heart that I'm not interviewing anybody else this week, but I'm giving my personal testimony. It's so much easier to have guests on the show and to, ask them their story and to share tidbits about myself here and there, but to actually sit down and do my full testimony, I postponed it for a few reasons. One, I wanted to be sure I was really on the other side of hell before giving it, and so here I am. And then two, just, I want to make sure that I tell it well and I tell it right. So I've been reading Acts and I've been reading about Paul and him being sent to prison, being persecuted by the Jews, and being taken in front of all these different Roman rulers. And every time he gave his defense, it was essentially his testimony. And in each of those instances, it gave the person hearing his story, his defense, the opportunity to hear the good news of Jesus. And most of them ignored him, but many people listened and are still learning from that. And their eternities are changed because of it forever. Still now, like we're still reading about Paul and what he did and how he told his story. So I know that, if my story can help at least one person, then that's enough for me. But the internet is crazy, so go wild. So I want to give you a brief overview of what my life is like now, just so that as I get into my testimony, you see the 180 that happened and you have something to contrast it to. So now I live in Florida with my sweet and loving husband. We've been married for a little over a year now. We live here with my dog Doge, he's still in the picture if you've been following the channel for a while. So my husband's a realtor and I'm currently employed in marketing. I have this Christian podcast, YouTube channel. I lead a women's Bible study. We're really active in the church. We just did the prep for marriage class, even though we're already married, and just, a variety of things like this. And overall, there's just peace in my heart with my life and with all of my relationships, and there's a true sense of integrity, which is something that I never had before Jesus began to transform me. And what that means is I'm the same person out in the world as I am behind closed doors and in secret. So everything is finally in alignment, because secrets and darkness, it always finds a way to come out into the light. And the way it came out for me was an explosion. To give you a brief outline of just some of the things that Jesus has saved me from, that looks like an abusive and demonic childhood upbringing, which led into lots of rebellion, not knowing my worth, sexual immorality, witchcraft, substance abuse, strip clubs, toxic relationships, and the list goes on. I find that the more that you know that you are saved by grace, the more you are willing to be open with these kinds of things. And also, when you know you've done a 180, when you know you're on the other side of it, it gives you the freedom to share about the things of the past, because you know that's not you anymore. You know that was your old life before Jesus gave you a new one. So Jesus knew even then, even when I was denying him, even when I was rebelling, that he would eventually use me as a living testimony. So I was born into a lineage of addiction. My parents were drug addicts. My mom was 17 when she got pregnant. My dad, 21. They were not expecting me. They were living the fast life. I stopped them in their tracks, but not for too long. They believed in the Bible, but they just didn't follow it at all, which is crazy because, they believe in God. They called themselves Christians, but there was also, all this drug and alcohol abuse, which is still witchcraft, opening portals to the demonic. And then more blatant witchcraft, too, of tarot cards being brought into the house, Ouija boards. My dad dated only strippers. My mom was a stripper. Lots of her friends would overdose and die, so she would use Ouija boards to try to connect with them, even though, this woman knows her Bible. So it's just crazy to me, the things that you'll be swayed into doing out of, mere curiosity. So the way I describe my childhood is really I grew up in hell, and I started seeing really scary paranormal things from a really young age. And, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night between the screams of my dad's girlfriends because, like I said, he was very abusive, And then just the terror I had being in my room alone in the dark and feeling these dark presences all around me. And I even began to see things too as I got older. And I thought it was ghosts. So I was, I think, in first grade when I wrote my first book in school, and it was all about ghosts. I remember I went to the library and I studied all about this. Like, what first grader does that, you know? But I didn't realize that it was demonic. You know, I thought it was ghosts, but now I see, looking back, it was just a lot of demonic activity. There was a motto in my house of "you shall be seen and not heard." So I really didn't get much socialization growing up. My dad didn't let me, you know, talk to other family members or friends or be involved in anything extracurricular because of what was happening at home. He knew the more I was out and about in the world, the more there was a chance that he was going to get told on. And to just kind of go back a little bit, I was 3 years old when the abuse and the cheating and the lies and the chaos got too much for my mom, so she left. And then she fell really deep into a heroin addiction that started with her being at the strip club. And she found out like her dad wasn't really her dad. The guy she thought was her dad died of cancer. It was this whole thing. And I pretty much lost my mom at that point. And it was just, she was in and out of prison my whole life. You know, sometimes I'd be able to see her, but most of the time my dad didn't want me anywhere near her because of, you know, random boyfriends and just things like this. I never really had a church life until my dad started getting in more legal trouble. I grew up in a really small town in Indiana where the pastor of the church was also my dad's lawyer. So that was the main reason we went. I didn't know at the time that my dad's like, you know, minor cocaine, weed, alcohol addiction was turning into a full-blown meth addiction. So he had moved us out to the middle of nowhere. And like I said, the abuse just continued to get worse and worse, especially for me too, as I got older and started resembling a woman more. So, you know, the abuse that he would give to his girlfriends and wives, it was now I fell in the same category. There was no more restrictions, even though as a little girl, like I was his baby girl. He protected me like over everything. He defended me over everything. So I feel like that's why it was even more traumatic too, is like it was the ultimate betrayal of like, I'm supposed to be your baby, like I'm supposed to be the one you protect. And he began to turn on me too, because drugs just, they turn you into another person. And I remember having like really brutal weekends and mornings, and then we'd have to go to church and we'd all be crying. Everybody would be a mess, our hair pulled, you know, his wife beat up, and then we'd pull into the church parking lot and he would tell us all, like threaten us that we better get a smile on our face before going in there. So I always felt like at church I wasn't safe and I was always hiding something, and I didn't feel like I belonged with the other children. I felt like they were like talking about things I just couldn't relate to because I was just in pure survival mode and chaos at home, where like I couldn't think about jumping rope or, you know, whatever else they were thinking about. I'm thinking like I'm gonna leave here and get my probably, and like I don't want to leave here. So yeah, it never felt like a place for me. But having said that, because everything was as bad as it was at home, I did find myself going to God a lot and praying a lot. I just didn't understand Jesus. So I always believed in God. And, you know, when people ask me, you know, when I get into the details of what really happened at home, people are like, how did you survive? And I really believe it's because I was God's kid. You know, he takes in the orphans. He adopts the orphans. He gives us a family in his family. And so even though I didn't know Jesus yet, I did understand God the Father and the Holy Spirit. And I remember just praying to God all the time to get me out of this, get me out of this house. I began to want to do things like my friends are getting together, my friends are in sports, they're doing all these things that I'm not allowed to do. And I remember the one time I tried to join track, and my dad had this whole conniption. I don't know, like this was a really traumatic memory for me where I ended up going to track because his wife told me he wasn't home from work, and somehow I thought I could pull this off of doing it and getting home before he got home from work. And he found out that I was there, and I knew I was going to get beat when I got home. And so that's just one of the examples of like I wasn't allowed to go anywhere if it wasn't the woods behind the house. So I hung out a lot just in nature with my animals. And then there was an animal rehab next door, but like I wanted more. Like I wanted to know what it was like to have a boyfriend and to hang out with my friends and do stuff like this. And so then I ended up meeting somebody on on the bus, really I met his sister, and she put me in contact with him, and it was one of those weird like texting relationships when you're a little kid and you send each other selfies. And so I was 12 and he was 15. And it's really, disgusting looking back, but at the time I thought I was so cool. I thought I was so mature. I thought he really liked me. But he was dating somebody, and I'll never forget, her name was like Kaylin or something like this. And he would tell me like all the things that they would do together, like sexual things. And I'm over here like, I've never even had my first kiss. But then he would like break up with me and get back with Kaylin because she would do these things. So I eventually ended up sneaking out one night to go meet him in person for the first time. Terrible idea. My first time ever doing that. 12 years old, riding a bike in the middle of the country, like 2 miles away at midnight. And I get to his house and I'm thinking, maybe like Max will have our first makeout or something like this, just something, just something. And it ended up going all the way, and I lost my virginity that night. And I don't remember it being like a traumatic thing. I just didn't know. I didn't know how to say no. I didn't even know if I wanted to say no. I feel like when you're a kid that grew up in abuse as well, like your boundaries are always, always crossed. So you don't even have boundaries. You don't know your boundaries. And then even if you do, you don't know how to speak your boundaries. The thing was, is like I didn't feel bad about it. Like there was a part of me that felt proud of it. And honestly, like as messed up as it all is, and how, I would never want that for any of my little sisters or any young girl, because this set me up for, the next years, so many years of the same kind of behavior and trying to redo that scenario to be better. But having said that, I do feel like this was a pivotal moment in my life where I came back and I felt more powerful. I felt like this was one thing that I did that my dad couldn't stop me from. And I began to feel like, I could stand up against him too. So this leads up to one of the craziest weekends in all history of experiences with my dad, where he beat his wife with a belt. I heard her crash to the floor. I heard my baby sister crash to the floor. And all these years, I'd never told anybody. I would hint to guidance counselors and stuff like this. And they would always tell me, like, if there's abuse, we'd have to call the police. So I would always just, okay, no, I'm not telling anybody anything. But this day, like, I was used to being abused, but now I have a little sister that's involved in it too, that's having to experience it too. And I just felt this anger, like this righteous anger, go all through me. And I looked at my stepsister, where we were hiding behind a pool. We just always would hide out when he got bad so we didn't end up in his line of fire. And I told her she had to go. And like I said, we lived out in the middle of nowhere, so it was like half a mile up the road to the next neighbor's house. And it's this elderly couple, and there's no way they would have been able to do anything, but it was our closest refuge. And so she went. My dad and his wife come out, and they're both screaming at me, like the audacity of the wife too, like, we're trying to help you. Besides the point. And my dad is just like, how could you let her go? Like, you should know better than this. And I was like, okay, like, I'm gonna go get her, don't worry. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, this is my opportunity to get out as well. So I run up the road. I know exactly where she is. I get there. This old couple just happened to be having a family reunion, like God's perfect timing, because if it was just them, we would have been so screwed. But they had their son-in-law open the door, had me come in. This family helped us get out of the situation. In the meantime, my dad is like threatening the son-in-law. He comes back with his shotgun and busts in all the windows of this house. Like, this is how nutso, guys. And so we get up the road. I stay the night with my grandparents that night. My stepsister goes back to her dad's house, and my dad is in jail this night. They finally found him after seeking him down in the woods. It was this whole chase. So I'm thinking, okay, so he's in jail now. But then the next morning, his old red, candy apple red Cadillac comes pulling in the driveway, and I knew that he was coming for me. And I remember him chasing me around the island. I run up to the barn because there's nowhere for me to go. So I like dart out the door, up the barn. There's this highway of cars passing by. They see it, but nobody stops to do anything. Like, I don't know what anybody would even do in that moment. And I just like stop, and he grabs me by my hair and drags me all the way up the driveway. And I know he's going to try to shove me in this car. So I slip out of the hoodie and I run from him, and I was headed in for the gun that was beside my grandpa's bed. And he pushes over my grandparents in the way of trying to get to me. They fall over in the driveway, just like igniting my fire even more, you know. And I get into the house and I grab the gun, and it was like time stopped because I've never stood up to him like this. And I'm walking down the hallway, and as soon as he opens the front door, I meet him there with the gun in his face. And I'm thinking in my head, you know, he's going to realize that this has gone too far, that he's done too much, you know, some kind of responsibility where his 12-year-old daughter that like loves him so much and has never done anything crazy like this would be to the point of pulling a gun on him right now. But no, I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with a narcissist or an addict, but it was instantly like my fault. Like, how could you? So yeah, he wrestles the gun out of my hands. Of course, I wouldn't have shot my dad anyways. And then we just sit there looking at each other, and he's just like looking at me with disgust, like he's the one that's betrayed, guys. So I end up having to go back with him. You know, I'm there for a while. He's just telling me how disgusting I am and how I might as well have shot him, and just all this gaslighting. This is why I literally walk around with so much guilt all the time. My husband always catches me and is like, you didn't do anything wrong. Like, you have nothing to feel guilty about. You did the best you can. Like, about every little thing. Like, did we stay long enough? Like, did I say this to where she could tell that I cared about her? My husband's like, chill. But I still carry this with me from these experiences. It goes deep, you know? So anyways, I go back to my grandma's house. That next morning, I get a restraining order on him. Now CPS is involved, this whole thing. And that's when the cops realized that he had a whole meth lab going on in that trailer. So long story short, my dad ends up going to prison for 5 years. And my little sister moves in with my aunt, who lived about 45 minutes away. And I now lived with my grandparents. I became so rebellious because not only was I brought up with no values, but now I had complete free reign as well. And so I remember I started, you know, sneaking out even more and partying with my friends. I started doing pain pills. My friend would bring her dad's random prescriptions to school, and we would do them literally at school. I did spice, I did weed, I did alcohol. So one of my friends that I was hanging out with, she had an older brother who was able to get access to everything. And so we're like 13, 14 years old, literally doing everything, you know? And then there was this guy that pretty much like, I don't even think he realizes how pivotal he was in my childhood, or anybody else that I went to school with either. But this guy, like, I was obsessed with him. And so we actually went way back, and I don't think he remembered that until I told him, but our parents used to do drugs together. And I remember having a crush on him in elementary school, and then he moves to our school later on in like middle school and actually lives with that friend that I was always hanging out with. He moved in with her older brother because they were on the football team together, and he had a bad family too. So now he's living there, and he only dated like good girls, sporty girls, girls that came from a good family, but he messed around a lot. And I was the kind of girl that he would be interested in behind closed doors and in secret, but never, I knew he was never going to date me, but any ounce of attention I could get from him, like, I would do anything. And I was also too nervous to talk to him because at this point I developed literally no social skills. I didn't know how to talk to people. I was not comfortable in my own skin. So this is a big reason that I drank so much, is it was the only thing that like gave me any ounce of confidence. And then I would drink so much and not even remember what happened or what I did or what I said. And this turned into just a terrible, terrible reputation that I was building for myself at school, because wherever he was, if he was at a party, if he was at the house, like, I was there and I was doing whatever he wanted me to do with whoever he wanted to do it with. And rumors were going around quick about me. And, you know, I was no longer like the abused girl. I then became like the slutty girl, the secret girl, the home wrecking girl. And other girls don't like that because you're now a threat. And so this is when fights started happening. I got suspended from school. I was in a handful of fights, and you know, there's a lot of drama in my friendships. I had good friends, but there's just so much drama, and everything was just bad. It was really, really bad. And because I knew this guy would never date me, I also hopped around guy to guy seeking love in that same broken way, because I didn't know any different. And I settled for the kind of treatment that I watched my dad give to women and I watched my mom settle for. And just that was the norm in my community, in my town, in my school. And so I settled for garbage and my life just became garbage. And I really like, that's really what I wanted was love. Like I'd been seeking love and I just didn't know how to get it. And I was going about it like a wrecking ball. And it got to the point where like I knew, you know, as much as I love my friends, as much as like I'd never lived in another town, I couldn't imagine leaving. Things at school just got so bad that I knew I couldn't stand it anymore. And things at home were getting worse too because my grandma was so poor. They could barely afford to pay the bills. I had been working. I started working when I was 15 because we were so poor. And, you know, I got all my school clothes at Goodwill. It was always like really embarrassing because I wanted more. I wanted nice things, but we just like couldn't afford it. And then they had to take my money to pay for the bills too. And I feel like all that stress that was on my grandma, because now she's supporting my dad in prison, like definitely an enabler. Like rest her soul, she meant well. She just didn't realize what she was doing and the fact that he was manipulating her and that he was still doing drugs in prison, but that's a later story. And so my aunt that my sister went to live with was giving my grandma money to help take care of me and pay for cheer because I'd been in cheerleading. And finally, I was texting my aunt a lot and she's like, why don't you just come live with me? Why don't you be a kid for once? Why don't you think about you for once? And I simmered on that for a while and I finally said yes because I had literally nothing to lose. It's crazy though. I want to just note on the fact that Jesus was pursuing me in every season because no matter where I was or what season I was in, there was always at least one person that was trying to pull me to him, that he was using to pull me to him. And so there was little trickles of that in every, like wherever I lived or wherever I was. And I had a friend that was at that old school that, you know, talked to me about Jesus and brought me to youth group. And, you know, her mom would take us out for ice cream. And I always felt like I am way too dirty. I'm way too bad to be hanging out with you. Like, I don't know why you like me. I don't fit in with these church people once again. But she did take an interest in me and I actually reached out to her like a year ago and was like, you don't realize like you were a reflection of Jesus to me in that point in my life when nobody else was. So I moved in with my aunt. Now I moved to a different school and like this was a fresh start for me and I was so excited. I was now on the school news team. Everybody was interested in who's the new blonde girl. And I held my reputation sacred. Like I knew I was not going to blow it up this time. I still partied a lot and, you know, I was friends with everybody. I was friends with the party kids, with the smart kids. I always got all A's and, you know, did really well in school and was in the college credit classes, but I'd also be messing around, getting high, getting drunk, finding parties. And then my aunt got on my case because she's like, I know you lived like this before, but this isn't going to fly under my roof. So I respected her and I didn't want to lose this fresh start that I got. So I did keep it more low key after that, but I was still doing the same things, but just more low key. And then I got a boyfriend in this town who really was just like a big stoner. So my life did get more quiet. If I wasn't at work, I'd be with him. And so I wasn't getting in as much trouble as what was getting in before that. I also took this time to get really serious about my future and about college. And I literally applied for scholarships like a madman. I'd always had this like scarcity thing. And it's something that Satan continued to use was like this fear of lack, like growing up in poverty. You're not going to have enough. So I worked. And I really, like after junior year, from junior to senior year, I really didn't have many like school experiences where I like went to games or, you know, extracurricular things because I worked so much and I wouldn't spend my money. And I ended up saving 20 grand while in high school those 2 years. And I was saving this for college. And I ended up getting a full ride scholarship to IU. And that was just like, you know, finally I felt like all these prayers had been answered of like, God, get me out of here. God, get me out of here. Where he did, he just kept making a way where there was literally no way before that. But at that time, I still wasn't like acknowledging him. And then just to note on like the spiritual life in my aunt's house too, is like there really wasn't one. Like she used to go to church, but then the people at the church, there was like some drama. So by the time I moved in, there was no church life, but there was like one crazy encounter. This is This is one of my first like real demonic encounters as I got older, where I had this sleep paralysis dream where this demon was fighting me in this dream, and I told myself I was going to wake up, and like he was like, no, you're not. And finally I did wake myself up, and I felt him in the room, and I was like, what the heck? Like, you should have been gone. Like, when I moved here, I thought all of the demonic was left in the old town with my parents. I didn't think anything would come with me, but it did. And like I said, I worked at Steak and Shake at that time. So a group of Mormon missionaries came in and just so happened to ask me if there was anything they could pray for me about. And at that time, like, I'd never seen a Mormon. I thought they were like Christians or something. And I told them about this, and I ended up coming to their church. They all laid hands on me and prayed this demonic spirit away. And I never experienced that spirit again. So really, like, the spiritual things got really quiet for me after that. And then the next part of my life was going off to college. So the summer that I went to college, my grandma ended up passing away, and my grandpa passed away about a year, maybe two before that. So now both of the people who were like my parents were now gone. And the way I found out about my grandma's passing was pretty traumatic. I'd been donating plasma because you get paid for it. I think I made like $200 or something. So I was donating plasma all the time. I wasn't allowed to work while in the scholarship program. They just wanted us to go to meetings and go to class. And so there was a no work rule. But I was always, like I said, I had this scarcity mindset. Like, I wanted more, I needed more. And so I was donating plasma, and I get the call, and I find out that my grandma passed. It was a pretty big loss in my life. And the more people that I lost, it was like the less accountability that I had. So this scholarship program was full of kids like me who were minority kids, came from poverty, or, you know, like just other minorities, and didn't really stand a chance getting into college, but had good grades that proved that they would do great at college if given the chance. So my roommate was another girl that was just like me, pretty much in upbringing. And I remember playing with the idea of going to the club and starting to dance, because I remembered hearing my mom and all my dad's girlfriends talk about how much money they made. And they also really desensitized it. Like, it's not stripping, it's not sexual, it's just dancing. It's just dancing. That's how they would tell me when I was a little kid. So I was like, okay, it's not that big of a deal, right? Like, it's just you put on like a sexy outfit and you dance and you get paid a lot of money. So 18-year-old me ends up in the strip club for the first time, a place that I never thought I would be. And really, I don't understand it, because it's not like I was at a rock bottom. But the devil has always convinced me that I'm not going to have enough and I'm not going to survive. And money was really my master. It got really crazy because there was this old creepy guy that was like obsessed with me. And he was like really possessive and scary. And I didn't want to talk to him anymore. And a group of the girls, the dancers, ended up cornering me in the locker room and telling me that I had to go out there and talk to him and hang out with him. Otherwise, he was going to leave. And he brought in the most money, so none of them wanted to see him leave. So that ends up being my last day at the club. I never went back after that. I wanted to experience the college life, and there's lots of like really wealthy people that went to my school, and I wanted to have the kinds of clothes that they had and the kind of makeup, and just I wanted that look that like I was from a good family and I was worthy. But I didn't want to go to the club anymore, because now my focuses are on school and like the actual college experience. So me and the same group of roommates end up finding like a seeking arrangements app, and that's when the whole sugar daddy lifestyle started to happen in my life as well. Kind of like how people say weed is the gateway into doing other drugs because it desensitizes you and it opens the door. This is the same way with the club, where it doesn't, I mean, it's definitely the devil's playground, you know, like I'm not going to say it's not, but just like performing dancing might not be terrible, but it does open doors to all these other much deeper, darker things, and you fall down quick. Like when you're playing in the devil's playground, like if he can get you to trip and fall down the slide, like yes, that's exactly what he's going to do. So I'm doing this, I'm going to frat parties, I'm blacking out, I don't know how I'm making it home most nights. If I even made it home at all, I'm ending up in class the next day, have to leave to go to the bathroom to throw up. Like I was a train wreck the whole first semester of college, but I was still all A's, you know, like nothing ever impeded me from that. And then I ended up meeting somebody who would later be my fiance. Not the guy I married, but this guy I got engaged to. And he came in like super romantic, super salesy. He knew what I wanted. He spoiled me, like all these things that like only the older, wealthier men were able to do. This guy was my age, from the same town as I was from, and he was taking me to like luxury dinners and massages and trips and all of these things. And I remember thinking like this is what I'd been looking for, but in somebody my age that I would actually be with. But we started off on a very sexual note. And, I really believe if you want to be able to tell the trajectory of a relationship, go back to what it was rooted in. And that's how you can tell. And our relationship was rooted in sex and a facade. We end up dating, and I come back to college for the next semester, and I'm like, okay, we're going to do long distance. I'm going to make this work because he lived in Arizona for college. He went away all the way across the country and went to ASU. So we were going to make long distance work, but we were both just such a mess. We'd both been like locked in animals that were free and just like didn't know how to control ourselves. And, I cheated on him and he cheated on me, and we lied to each other. And it was just, and we would try to get back together and make it work. And we ended up moving in together that next summer into his mom's house. And we were just like on the path to destruction together, doing all these things for money. Now as a team, like I said, selling things we shouldn't be selling. We started shoplifting. It was it was really bad once again. Nothing probably would have changed unless I was physically forced to stop. And that's exactly what happened, because I got in trouble. I got caught shoplifting. He never got caught. They had been building a case on both of us, but I was the only one that got caught. Yeah, so I knew then, like, I'm 18, I could lose my scholarship. This could impact the rest of my future. And I was so scared. I was so mortified. And this leads to my first encounter with God.